Merhaba hocam.
Merhaba Zerda, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. What about you?
Fine. Are you in Kazakhstan or here?
No, in Kazakhstan.
Okay. Best wishes to Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much hocam.
Celal Hocam merhaba. Zehra merhaba.
İyi bir toplantı diliyorum Sayın Müdürüm.
Teşekkür ediyorum Celal Hocam. Şeref verdiniz. Çok teşekkürler.
Hürmetler sunuyorum.
Merhabalar hocam.
Merhabalar Zehra. Merhabalar Burcu Hocam.
Merhabalar
Nilgün Erdoğan. Merhabalar Güneş Atasoy.
Merhabalar hocam.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you for the first of the academic writing seminar series. And I would like to thank especially to Professor Dr. Julian Aydınlı for having accepted to be the first of our academic writing seminar series. And it's a great honor and privilege to host her in our institution. Even though it is not face-to-face, I think I can see your faces from the screen, and it's a great honor. And I would like to thank the audience members for taking their times to join us for this event, to make this event possible. And first of all, I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Julian Aydınlı to you briefly, and then I will leave the floor to Professor Aydınlı. Professor Dr. Aydınlı received her BA, MA, and PhD degrees from McGill University, Canada. And her MA and PhD degrees are in applied linguistics. And in the doctoral dissertation, she did academic literacy practice in a second language, portraits of Turkish scholars of international relations. In the MA study, the socialization of students from the developing world into the academic discipline of international relations. And she worked at İhsan Doğramacı Bilkent University as a faculty member from 2006 to 2017. And then she joined in 2017 Ankara Social Sciences University as a professor at the Faculty of Foreign Languages, English Language and Literature Department. She held some administrative positions there, including deanery. And one of the outstanding publications of hers is the 2018 Cambridge University Press Journal Language Teaching article, Selected Research in Applied Linguistics and English Language Teaching in Turkey. It's in the State of Art review. She surveyed published research in 31 Turkey-based journals from 2010 and 2016. And I'm going to give the link of this article and the details. I strongly recommend you to read this article for your career plans, for your research plans. And as a person born in an inner circle country, the United States, and as a person who got education in another inner circle country, Canada, and as a professor lecturing in Turkey in an expanding circle country. Turkey is regarded in the Kashruvian perspective an expanding circle country. She's been lecturing here. She's been publishing research here in Turkey, based in Turkey, and at the same time, she's been supervising research work. She knows both sides, the inner circle, born and educated in an inner circle country, and now doing research work, supervising research work in an expanding circle country, Turkey. I think she is the right person to show a mirror to us. How can we do well in publishing in the periphery, in the expanding circle? How can we more effectively disseminate our knowledge internationally and locally? And I'm sure we will benefit a lot, and her perspectives will be of great value to us. And I would like to leave the floor to Professor Dr. Aydınlı. The floor is yours, Ms. Aydınlı.
Thank you very much, Jamal Hoca. Thank you for inviting me to give this talk, and thank you for arranging it, and thank all of you on a Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock on a sunny, beautiful day in Ankara or wherever you are. I'm sure that there are things you could be doing that would be more fun, but I hope we can have a nice talk today. Maybe there'll be something of benefit in my talk for you today. The topic is one that's been of interest to me for a long time. You mentioned as far back as my master's thesis, I was looking at the socialization of graduate students into an academic discipline, and I was focusing on their academic writing as a means of socialization into the discipline. And then when I went on to my PhD, I started looking at scholars. And of course, I was working with a particular discipline, and that happened to be international relations. If any of you out there know me, there's an obvious reason for that. Of course, my husband is a professor of international relations. And it was through watching his experiences, first as a graduate student becoming, as a master's student becoming socialized into his discipline, and the issues that he faced learning how to write like an international relations scholar. And then later, as he became an assistant professor and an associate professor, etc., looking at the issues that he faced there too, with not just socialization, but actually how you make choices in your academic writing when you're publishing, the types of things you have to think about as second language scholars in a discipline, which are an added burden to what I, as a native speaker, have to think about when I'm publishing or making decisions about publishing. So the topic is both dear to my heart because it's very close to me. And as you pointed out, I've been living here for 20 years now. It's something that I see my friends and my family and my colleagues living through. So I've both researched it and lived it. From my very, very first published article back in 2000 was a piece that looked at the imbalances in publishing, again, in the field of international relations, because that was what I'd been working on. But it looked at how the core journals, there's an imbalance. The knowledge is produced in the core. And for those from the outside, from the periphery or from the expanding circle countries, as you note, it's just that much harder to break into that core. And I will talk about that today. After that long intro, let me share my screen.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you but thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and my experiences and my ideas with you. So. Sorry, I'm going to try to make this full screen. Okay, so yes, so I came up with the title Publishing from the Periphery, Methodologies of New Lingua Franca, and we'll get back to that title in a minute. But first, just to give you some idea of what this talk will be like, I have to give you the bad news. There's no way I'm going to give you a silver bullet or a magic bullet, as they say, and say, do this 1, 2, 3, and you'll get published, or watch this, 50-minute video and you'll be able to get published. And there are reasons for this that you all know. The obvious one is the language issue. I still am in awe of people like yourselves that are able to conduct academic careers in second language. I've studied a lot of languages. My BA degree was in Russian. I've studied French since I was in elementary school. research article in Turkish. I'm just going to call it the domestic system is another difficulty here. And I'm getting a notice that my internet connection is unstable.
Yes, there's some temporary problem. I see it.
I hope. I'm counting on Bilkent's internet system to work. So I hope that. Okay. Anyway, the domestic system you're all very familiar with. What I mean by this is, let's be honest, many of us have much heavier workloads than our colleagues in many Western country universities. As a full professor, I'm teaching 4 undergraduate courses per semester, and we have administrative duties. Some of my younger colleagues are teaching 6 undergraduate courses. Yeah, so how are we, and yet we're expected to publish. And I feel really genuinely concerned for my younger colleagues who are trying to publish to achieve their docentlik requirements, and yet they're teaching this much. Something has to bend there. You can't do it all. So I'm aware of those obvious difficulties. Don't worry, I'm not going to only talk about the bad news, but I do have one more bad news. I won't get into this, but I put it up here because it's something that my husband and I have been talking a lot about lately. It's just of interest to us. It comes from, if you have a background in economics or international relations, you might know about dependency theory. And again, it's basically about that imbalance between the core countries and the periphery countries, and in which the core countries manufacture goods, the periphery countries just are considered useful for raw materials. So it creates a system of inherent imbalance and dependency, where the periphery takes, in this case, intellectual knowledge and ideas, but the core is not prepared to take those same ideas from the periphery. So there's an imbalance there. I have a little diagram here, but it's this idea of, this inherent imbalance, and you are fighting against that when you're coming from the periphery. I won't get into that, but I'm just saying there are a lot of things keeping the scale tipped against you, but there is good news. Okay. I still think, despite these imbalances, despite these difficulties, there are certain things that we can do, you can do, that can help at least tilt the scale back a little bit more in our favor. And that's what I'm hoping to talk with you about today. So we get to my title here, Methodology as a Lingua Franca. The first thing I just want to do is to clarify, this is something that will be familiar to all of you, but for the purposes of my talk today, how am I using the term methodology? I'm distinguishing it from methods. So if you think of methods as the sort of the tools for collecting data or for analyzing data, qualitative, quantitative, whether you're talking about interviews and surveys or quasi-experimental studies, those are what I'm calling methods. And I will use both terms. But methodology, I'm talking about a more sort of a broader scope, a kind of the overall stages of research design. Excuse me. And I think therein lies a key to, well, you'll see in a minute. So what are those stages of overall research design? Again, just, you all know this, but for the purposes of making sure we're all on the same starting point, I would argue that there are 6 stages basically of overall research design. You have to ask a research question or posit some kind of argument. You have to show that you understand what's come before you and understand how your research question fits into that existing scholarship. You have to, in some way, determine an approach for studying the question, basically coming up with a methodology. You have to present enough evidence that you have shown to argue the answer to your question, and you have to present it logically. You have to, after you presented your findings. Basically, you have to somehow discuss them, show how they connect to the rest of the literature. And finally, you have to present some kind of implications, whether it's policy implications for teaching or for theory, etc. Those seem pretty standard. I would just note there's also, when you talk about methodology, it's also broader than methods because it has a kind of a why question behind it. Your choice, the choices you make for all of these stages will both reflect your ideas about research, and they will also determine to some extent how the research goes. So just keep that in mind. The fact that these stages, I hope, I mean, all of you out there would agree with me that these are fairly accepted stages of research design. The fact that that's true is what makes it a lingua franca, I think. And I guess, of course, I will be talking more about this, but just at the outset, I would say these stages, those 6 stages, are kind of our expectations as researchers about how we conduct and write up research. So it's kind of like a language, and it's something that we all, as researchers, accept, regardless of our native speech language. And these 2 little designs here are meant to indicate, I would ask you to sort of imagine in your minds, would it be easier to sit down and talk with me in English about literature gaps or about ANOVA tests? Or would it be easier to speak in Turkish, in your native language, with your grandfather about literature gaps? Probably it would be easier to speak in English with me about
Very interesting question.
Okay, so in that sense, literature gaps or the stages of research are a language. They're the lingua franca of our common community of scholars. So that's the starting point of my talk today, if you will. With that in mind, if we agree then, if we can sort of agree that this is a language we all have in common, whether we're doing it in English, granted I have the advantage, I know we're doing it in English, but nevertheless, there is a common language there. With that in mind, what I'd like to go over with you now is a kind of a 5-step, this is not the magic bullet to solving things, but it's a sort of an approach to hopefully to successful publishing. And I would point out that the first 4 of these all happen before you even start writing. And the 5th one is only partially about writing, but the first 4 are before you even sit down to write. And some of these will be more relevant to some of you may be graduate students out there, some will be more relevant to junior scholars, and some of them will have some interest or relevance maybe to even senior scholars that might be in the audience. So the first one seems pretty obvious, but you have to have a niche. You have to have some area that is yours in the field of whatever your field is. For most of us, I think it's English language teaching research. And more importantly, you have to choose it carefully. And what does that mean? Depends on who you are. For those of you out there who are graduate students, it's always smart, of course, to have a niche which is at the very edge of what is being done in research, the cutting edge, so to speak. So you're probably looking to choose a thesis topic, for example, that is trend setting, always keeping in mind that the things that you read now will be very much researched 3 years down the road, but you always want to try to be at the edge. Now, how do you find a trend setting topic? Of course, your supervisor, your professors will be there to help you. But my warning to the graduate students would be, don't rely just on them. We as the seniors are here to give you feedback and perspective, but you young people out there are the ones that are the future of the discipline. So it's up to you to help us guide you in a proper way. So I would just recommend, if you're a graduate student looking for a thesis topic, or a niche, as I call it, step 1, the burden is still on you to be out there finding that niche, and we will help you as much as we can. I would just also note, I see flashing up things in the chat box. I can't see the chat box, so I hope if someone wants something answered right away, if perhaps
Yes,
So
I will let you know, Julia Hocam, I will let you know.
feel free to interrupt me if it's something that should be answered right now, just so that.
Thank you.
Okay. If you're an assistant professor, again, these are very obvious things, but I wanted to start out with step one. This is sort of the basis. So this is, remember, finding a niche. Remember, if you're an assistant professor, I know they don't call them that right now, but your niche has to be appropriate. When I went for my docentic, I had, I don't know, 12 SSCI publications or something, and about half of them were disregarded because they were not relevant to my field. Fortunately, I still had enough to pass, but you have a limited amount of time. So, you know, be smart, be strategic when you're choosing your niche and stick to it. So make sure it's an appropriate one. And I would advise for our young colleagues to not be too dispersed in your work. The idea of being, you know, a jack of all trades means that you're an expert in a lot of things, or not an expert, you know a lot of little things. But it's not practical as a young scholar, because to really get published in the best journals, you're going to need to get in deep into something. You're going to need to know that topic, that niche, whatever it is, to the very bottom, and have the insights that can only come from that depth of knowledge. And if you're doing a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here, you don't have the time to gain that depth. So if you're a young scholar, focus, focus, focus, and get in deep. You can always expand after your docentic. And for all of us, just a general thing, I think we all need to remember that we need to have a niche or a topic of interest to us. And that has to be genuine, because if you don't have that genuine topic, there's no way you can sort of boost in yourself the curiosity and the focus that's needed to get in still deep enough to be able to conduct research which will get you published in a good journal. So with those in mind, you've chosen your niche. Now you have to have a good question. And as teachers, we always tell our students, there's no bad question, but in research, there are bad questions. And I'm going to tell you what I think are 4 types of bad questions, bad research questions. The first type of bad research questions, if you will, are ones which are disingenuous. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll tell you about the opposite. Good research questions are genuine. They're not disingenuous. In other words, they're ones that you really want to know the answer to. And I always used to tell this, or I tell this to my graduate students, that if you already know the answer, or you think that you already know the answer to something, then you're not conducting research. You're just trying to prove a point to somebody. And this is true at any level. If we don't have that genuine desire to understand the answer to the question, it's probably not a good research question, and that will make it harder to get it published, the research that comes out of it. Another bad research question is one which is what I call illegitimate, okay? So good questions have to be legitimate. What does that mean? It means they have to be based on something. We have this idea that, inspiration comes just, boom, inspiration, eureka, I have an inspiration for something. It isn't usually that way. Usually it's based on something. You've had a past experience or an observation or something which subconsciously has been in your head. And one day it comes together and you go, wow, and you have an inspiration. It's the same with a research question, I think. Something sparks a good research question. Maybe it's something you've been observing in your classroom. Maybe it's something you've been reading about in the journals. Maybe it's something that, you've read a lot of theories and you think there's a problem there. It doesn't match with what I'm seeing. But there's something behind there which leads to a good research question. If your research question just seems to come out of the blue, you're like, hey, why don't I study, motivation among students? Just because you think that that's something you should study. If it's not coming out of clearly some legitimate background, it's probably not going to be a good research question, and it won't get published. Third type of bad question, obviously, are unanswerable questions, so questions that can't be answered. Now, that may be because they're just written badly. Like if you write a really general research question. You know, hey, how does music impact language learning? Of course, there's something maybe there, but if it's so general, it's going to be hard to research it, not easy to answer it. So that would be a bad research question. Or it could simply be that it's too impractical. There might be a great research question, but the only way to answer it is to collect data for 2 decades. You don't have the time or the energy to do that. So that's a bad research question because it's unanswerable. So, and then the fourth type of bad research question is ones that are unimportant, simply, okay? Now, what makes a research question unimportant is that if it has no interest, if the answer is not of interest to anyone, it's unimportant. An important question will be of interest, or the answers to it will be of interest to others, maybe through the pedagogical implications, maybe through contributing to new concepts or theory building. Somehow there has to be some audience out there. I don't care who the audience is, but some audience particularly must be looking for the answer to the question you are asking. That makes an interesting and important research question. So those are, avoid bad research questions. That's step 2. Remember, this is all before you start writing. Third, pick your target venue. Basically, where are you going to try to publish? And do so strategically. I will talk more about the venues in a minute, but at the very first step, deciding where to publish, you have to think about what you need or what you want out of it. I'm just going to put up a couple of options here, but there are many others. But let's say your goal, your clear goal is you want to teach, you want to get an appointment at a top university in Turkey. These days, many of those top universities, not all, but many of them, focus only on certain index journal articles as their judgment of whether you can get hired or not. Many of you out there know this better than I do. I haven't had to look for a job in a long time, but I do know from my long-time experience at Bilkent, for example, if you don't have publications in SSCI or SCI, if you're a scientist, or the Arts and Humanities Citation Index, if you don't have publications there, you're not going to get hired. And if you waste your time, frankly, publishing book chapters, as rewarding as they may be, as hard work as they do require, or if you waste time publishing in conference proceedings, those won't count. They simply won't get you hired. Unless, of course, you can retain that copyright control so that you do the book chapter, but then you can also turn around and publish it in a journal or try to publish it in a journal. But the point is, you have to be realistic about if you're trying to get in a certain place, aim for these journals. You know, maybe you want to work abroad. This is a little different. To be honest, I haven't applied for a job abroad in a long time. So, but it might be a little different there. The emphasis is not only on these particular 2 indexes or 3 indexes of journals. So there you might be okay with a broader type of publication, still though, you know, focused on an important area of research. Maybe you're not so concerned with where you teach, but your goal is to influence the practice of teaching English in Turkey or other languages. Then, you know, local journals are a better focus for you because they get read locally and you become more of the local disciplinary community through publishing there, possibly. I could go on and on, but my main point here is think about your needs, your priorities, and then choose your venue strategically. Don't choose the venue just because, oh, I've heard of this journal, let me try to publish there. That's not a wise way to proceed. More importantly, once you've chosen your venue, you need to know that venue well. You need to know it, as they say, like the back of your hand. And that has a few steps. I have a few things to say about that. I'll just remind you, when you submit to a journal, you can get rejected at 3 different levels. You can get rejected right from the start. That's called a desk rejection. They don't even bother sending it out to the reviewers. They just say, nope, and they reject you. 2, they can say, okay, They send it to the reviewers, and the reviewers say, nope, and they reject you at level 2. The third possibility, the reviewers say, maybe revise and resubmit, and you can do your revisions, send it back, and they say, we still aren't sure, and then they reject you at level 3. Your first step, when I say know your venue well, you at least want to avoid that first level rejection, because that's of no use to you. You're not even getting any feedback from reviewers. So your first step is to avoid desk rejection. And how do you do that? Obviously, if you've chosen your venue carefully, that's important. We'll talk about that. But the first thing then, if you know your venue well, you don't want to get rejected because you have done something technically wrong. You've written too long a manuscript or too short, or you sent it to the wrong section of the journal or something like that. So I put up 2 examples here from some big journals in the core here. We all know TESOL Quarterly. This little bit here means impact factor 2.718. For those of you who are carefully following impact factors now, because some schools, again, I will refer to my old institution, Kent. It's not just about SSCI publications. You have to have SICI publications with high impact factors. So that's why I put the impact factors up here. So if you want to publish in TESOL Quarterly and you want to submit a research article, it better be between 7,000 and 8,500 words. And that has to include the references, the notes and the tables, etc. All of that within that limit. Not too short, not too long. But maybe you have something shorter you want. You can submit it for a brief report and summary section, which is a maximum of 3,400 words, everything included. Or maybe you want to submit something that's just about your teaching, an issue in teaching. Don't even submit something. You just submit an abstract only, and they will tell you whether they want to see more. And maybe you have a book review. Don't just submit it. They don't take book reviews submitted from nobody. They request book reviews. It's by invitation only. My point here is know what you're doing and don't get rejected. Don't waste your time sending a book review to TESOL Quarterly unless you've gotten that invitation to do so. Similarly, computer-assisted language learning, look at that impact factor. Ooh, that would get you hired anywhere. That's a great journal. 8,000 word maximum, but they want these particular sections in this order. So if you do these sections wrong, or if you send in something that's 9,000 words, it might be a great piece, but it might literally get a desk rejection because you haven't paid attention to these details. So first, avoid desk rejection. Don't do something. Another thing that can get you desk rejected is if you send it to the wrong journal. And this goes back to reading the aims and the scope carefully. So picking your venue strategically, both for yourself, your niche, or what you want, your goal, but also to meet the niche, if you will, of the journal. At random, I picked 3 good journals, let's say good, they have good impact factors from the core here, Second Language Acquisition, ELT Journal, and again, TESOL Quarterly, because I just mentioned it. And let's look at this key sentence from each of their aims and scope. One of them says that they encourage submission of previously unpublished articles on topics of, sorry, I have to shrink down the people on the side here, I can't read what I've written, topics of significance to individuals concerned with English language teaching and learning. Okay, that's one of those journals. The second one says there should be a balance between theory and practice in all submissions. And then they explain that, if you're describing practice, it should be related to theoretical principles. If you're doing theory, it should be clarified by reference to practical applications. So they're emphasizing a balance. And then the third of these journals says theoretically driven essays, as well as theoretically motivated empirical studies in any area related to second language acquisition are acceptable. So you can see in these 3 descriptions, very different emphases in these 3 journals. And if you're turning in something which is really about heavily emphasizing something to do with pedagogy, the teaching aspect, and you submit it to number 3, which is second language acquisition, you're going to probably get desk rejected right there, because they're really more into theory. And that should be the emphasis there. But if you're turning in something that's trying to really question some theoretical concept, and you turn it into number 1, which is really wants topics of concern to individuals who are concerned with English language teaching, which is a more teaching oriented, which was TESOL quarterlies, you might get desk rejected there. So pay attention to the aims and the scope, and choose your niche and your journal, your venue accordingly. Another aspect to knowing your venue, it's wise to know to know the people connected. And I don't mean this personally, I don't mean call them up and say hello, but do pay attention to who the editorial team is. And if you have the time, this is all part of your research before you do your research. You can even be thinking about looking to see whether there are patterns in how the journal, the types of things that they publish as the editorial teams change. If you have the energy to do this, see whether there are shifts, meaning one editorial team might be more interested in qualitative research, another one might be more interested in quantitative. Maybe certain areas become emphasized, areas of study. If you can, try to be open to understanding that. At least, though, investigate the editors themselves, the current editors, and see what areas they're interested in, what their own research is in. I would also say about connections, try to cite a few people who've published in that journal before. Again, this may be something that you're all very familiar with, but if you find it easy to cite some past work from the journal, it means that probably you've chosen a good venue, because clearly they're interested in the topic you're writing about if you're able to cite people from the past. And B, those people, there's still a slightly better chance that they're serving as reviewers for the journal. So there's a better chance if you cite them and they receive your manuscript to review, it will be a nice gesture. They will see their own name there and they might review you more kindly. So that's knowing who's connected, which brings us to step 5. Back to our title, Methodology as a Lingua Franca. Remembering what I meant as methodology, those 6 stages of research. If we agree, and I think, think back to my analogy, would you rather speak with me in English about literature gaps or with your grandfather in Turkish or your aunt? If we agree that methodology is a kind of language that we share with our colleagues from all around the world, and those colleagues include those critical editors and reviewers that are the gatekeepers to the journals we want to get into, then maybe what we should be focusing on, as much as, there are certain things we can't do. If you're writing in a second language, you do what you can to become more familiar with it. But what you can do is think about, are you speaking the same methodological language? And basically, I mean by that, are we following the same patterns of those, I call them 6 stages? And more importantly, when we're writing up our research, are we prioritizing the amount of time we spend on each of those 6 stages in the way that's expected, the language that's expected in the journals that we're targeting? So I started thinking about this last week when I was getting ready for this talk, and I decided to I was really curious. Now, I always say good questions, right, come out of genuine curiosity. And I wanted to see whether we do seem to be doing the same things here. Now, as Jamal Hoca pointed out, I had written an article a couple of years ago where we looked at publishing practices among Turkish, in the field of ELT in Turkey. And we had observed some things which concerned us, but that was, a different type of study. Right now, I just wanted to have a glimpse into whether the methodological language being spoken in leading Western journals looked like the same as what we're speaking here. And by this, I mean methodology is lingua franca. So I decided to do a little look. So what did I do? I did a very, very mini investigation. Now, bear in mind, I did this on Friday afternoon, just out of my own curiosity. So I picked two journals, which I think we're all familiar with. Applied Linguistics, impact factor 3.593, very high impact factor. And again, TESOL Quarterly, which is just sort of a classic journal we're all familiar with. I picked those two, and then I picked two leading journals in Turkish ELT research. And I'm not going to name them, not because they're bad, not because I find something bad, but I don't want to put anybody on the spot. And it's frankly not important, but they're good journals. They have solid review practices, and they publish things that all of us, we would all like to get published in these journals. So two top Turkish journals, two top Western journals, shall we say. And I wanted to see if we're speaking the same language. Are we prioritizing the amount or the parts of the research in the way we're presenting it? And since I didn't have a lot of time, and I was just sitting in my office thinking about this, I did it in a very crude methodology. So this is not going to be published. This is just for our talk today. This is just to give a sense. So what did I do? I just picked the most recent 6 research articles in these 4 journals. I did that because in the latest issue of Applied Linguistics, there were 6 research articles. So that set my number at 6. And I did it from all 4 journals. And basically what I did, I simply counted the number of paragraphs in each section of the articles as an indication of the weight being given, the priority being given to those sections. And what were those sections? They came out to be 6 different sections. There was an introduction section. Sometimes it was named, sometimes it wasn't. It was just the beginning, but basically some kind of introduction section. There was a review of the literature section. Again, sometimes this was directly named literature review. Sometimes it was named with the topic, but it was clearly some section in which they were going over the literature which led up to this study. There was a methodology section, sometimes called methods, sometimes called something else, but methodology. Obviously, there was some kind of results section. And I would just point out, for the sake of this mini investigation, if there were tables or figures in it, I counted those as like 1 paragraph. If there was a table, I counted it as a paragraph. So keep that in mind when you see the numbers. A discussion section, this is the 5th section. Some kind of section, often called discussion, but not always, in which the findings of the study were connected to the broader literature, either the past literature, sometimes to the future. Sometimes it would be called implications or suggestions for further research, but some kind of section making that connection. And finally, a conclusion section, labeled conclusion. Okay, ready to see my findings? I'll show the Western journals first. Basically what you see here is those 6 sections, intro, lit review, methods, etc. These are the 2 journals. And remember, I did 6 articles in each of the journals. So this is a total. In those 6 articles, there were 21 paragraphs in Applied Linguistics, 21 paragraphs devoted to the introductions, 72 paragraphs in the lit reviews, total, 6 articles, 84 methods, 117 results, 54 discussion, six paragraphs total for conclusion. TESOL Quarterly, same intro, significantly less in the literature review, quite a bit less in methods, quite a bit more in results. You can see some variation here, but I averaged those together. And and this here is the percentage of the total. Out of all the paragraphs, approximately 6% of the paragraphs were devoted to intros, 20% to lit reviews, 23, 4 to methods, et cetera, okay? And this in red is the average percentage, how many paragraphs, what percentage of the full article was devoted to introductions, lit review, methods, results. That's what this is in the West. Now let's look at the Turkish journals. I'll let you just look at that for a minute. And then I'll give you some of my thoughts on this. You can see, some things, this one, for example, quite similar. 40% were results there, 38%, 38.4% results in the Turkish journals. You can see some things that look a bit more different. Okay. To make it easier to understand, I also calculated the percentage difference between those percentages. So, for example, the plus means that Turkish journals had 23% more devoted to intro, 43% more devoted to lit review, 27% less devoted to methods, 4% less to results, that's minor, 28% less to discussion, and 152% more devoted to the conclusions section. So what I'd like to do is talk about this a little bit. And I'm not going to discuss the results section because this is a very negligible difference. And indeed, there were discrepancies, bigger discrepancies even between these two journals. So the results section seems to be fairly common. But it does seem like that we're doing, in the Turkish journals, we're doing a bit more of some things and a bit less of other things than even the average of these two journals here. And I think that even though you can argue that these are, these are just 4 journals, but I still think they lead you to certain conclusions which are not that different from what we found in our article back in 2018. So I think what we're doing too much of in our writing, possibly, maybe when we submit articles even, we might be doing too much lit review. That's what literature LR means, too much literature review. For those of you who are graduate students, if you're writing a thesis, you have to do a lot of literature review. It's incredibly important to display your familiarity with the literature. That's your job as a master's student or as a PhD student. You have to show us who are going to sit on your juries that you know your stuff, and that's good. But when you try to turn your thesis into a research article, a publishable article, or even for those of us in the field who are just trying to write up our research, we have to remember always that we're not showing off that we know the field. We're just guiding fellow colleagues and experts along territory which should be familiar to them already. So we don't need to impress them with our breadth of knowledge. We need to be very precise and show them, look, you know this too, but I went from this literature to this literature, and here's my gap. Okay, so I think we're spending maybe a little bit too much time on literature reviews, and I'll get back to that in a minute when I talk about what we're not doing enough of. The other thing you saw that our conclusions were way, way longer than theirs. This was the biggest difference, in fact. Even though conclusions are a small part of it, ours were this long and theirs were this long. And I think that when I look at them, our conclusions tend to involve this big, long summary of the whole piece. And theirs tended to be like 2 sentences of summary and then a kind of a wrapping up message. And that was it. One of the articles in Applied Linguistics didn't even have a conclusion, or maybe 2 of them didn't. I have to go look at my raw data. But I think that we're spending a lot of time on conclusions because, and I don't want to say because, I don't know why, but it could be because technically a big long summary is easy to write because you've done the research, you know it. It's easy to then summarize it again. But it's not necessarily that important. We also have 2 long introductions. This isn't a huge difference in the 2. So this one maybe, it needs more research, but it's possible. It's possible that we're we're taking too long to introduce the topic, maybe. And I know that Robert Kaplan's rhetorical patterns, remember these, they've been debunked, and I'm not going to say, oh, look, there's something here. But maybe for publishing, to get beyond that desk reject, we might need to be a little bit more direct and get to the point quickly in our introductions, so that we keep the interest of the reviewers without them falling asleep, which is probably what I'm starting to do to you now. So I'm going to get going here. The point is, our introductions seem to be a bit too long, so we might want to be cautious in our introductions. So if that's what we're doing too much of, what are we not doing enough of? And the first big one gets back to the whole point of my talk today, which is methodology. If you look at the numbers, for example, in Applied Linguistics Journal, almost 25% of the whole article is devoted to the methodology section, almost 24%, 24 point something. I don't think we're giving enough emphasis to methods. And I wrote methods there on purpose. I'll talk about this in a second. To methodology, maybe. We all share that common sense. The Turkish journals all have the right sections too. But to some extent, it looks like the methods section is getting shrunk down quite a bit, 28% less, it seems, than what were in the methodology sections of the Western journals. And I think that this gives us a key, which is a strategy for those of you who are more concerned about linguistic issues when publishing. Maybe instead of methodology as a lingua franca, we should also be thinking about methods as a lingua franca. If you learn the language of a particular methodological approach to data collection or analysis, you have an even more clear-cut shared discourse, even more so than this broad understanding of research question methodology, that 6-step thing. This is an even more sort of structured way of communicating ideas that is common with people who use that same data collection or analysis approach. For example, if you do conversation analysis, or if you do genre analyses or whatever, people who do that type of methods, use that method as well, will immediately go, hey, that's a fellow speaker of conversation analysis, or that's a fellow user speaker of genre analysis, or whatever the method is. And I think they will be more ready to pay attention to your ideas, even if the writing, you miss, an article, the or an here or there, or if you use a vocabulary word that might be less, appropriate than another one. So I think that if you can pull them in with that lingua franca of a method, then worrying about language editing, English language editing, many of the big Western journals do offer language editing, or you can, find someone here or something. But first, the step in, maybe through methods. And yet, despite that, as an obvious sort of inroads, we seem to be not doing as much with our methods section. And our methods sections were much shorter than the ones in the core journals. And I would also just say for all of us, methods are a benefit to all of us, me, you, anyone out there, because they're like tools. And the more tools you have, the better you can do research. You can answer more types of research questions, or you can answer research questions in many different ways. And I think having more research tools, if you will, it gives you a more diverse or a broader perspective on research, which is why I have the hammer and nails picture. It's that classic, if you only have a hammer, everything will look like a nail. But if you have a big toolkit of methods, tools, you can see your world opens up with respect to the type of research you can do. And that's a good thing for publishing. That just broadens your chances. The other thing we're doing too little of is the discussion section. The discussion sections were generally like 28% shorter in the Turkish journals than they were in the Western journals. Just to remember, what is the discussion section? That's the section in which we are connecting our research to the outside world, to the research that's been done, or maybe to the research that should be done. But in any sense, it's some kind of connecting the two. And to write a good research section, we have to both know our own research, which we do, but we also have to be able to relate it to that broader field. And I wonder, remember I said that I might, we had our literature review sections were longer, but our discussion sections are shorter than theirs. And I'm going to speculate here, but I welcome hearing your thoughts on this. It seems like we're more comfortable with the literature review sections. We're good at those. You're good at, all of you, you know your stuff. We're not talking about people who don't know the literature, who don't know their field. You know your stuff, and we're very comfortable with showing that. But it seems like we're less comfortable perhaps with critically engaging with that literature field to show where the gaps are or how our research relates to it. That's a deeper kind of discussion. And I wonder if it goes way back to that first screen where I said the domestic structural issues, which limit our publication chances. If you're teaching 4 or 6 undergraduate courses, and I mean separate ones, not even different sections, but separate courses, and if you have administrative work, how do you have the time to not just be familiar with the literature, but to really have the time to sit down and engage with it in a way that allows you to reach those insights about how your research fits into it? It's not that easy. Some of you may also point out maybe the educational system, which is still predominantly more based on memorization and not entirely, but to some extent more memorization and repetition, and less so on critical engagement and discussion. Is this why? I don't know, but this is something that I noticed. Our discussion sections were a bit short. So overall, based on this incredibly tiny mini investigation, and somewhat based on the article from 2018, I would say, I think we need to, when writing, when submitting, after you've chosen your niche, chosen your venue, explored and studied your venue, come up with a good research question. I forgot that one. When we sit down to write, we need to try maybe getting straight to the point in the introductions, write literature reviews that guide the reader, but don't overwhelm them with details. Carefully describe our methodologies, and those methodologies should be very well conceived, reliable, transparent. I don't care if you're doing positivist type studies or highly qualitative ethno-methodological studies. Whatever your methodology is, do it well and describe it well. And then when you've done your research and you've put out those results, try to make the discussion come to the forefront rather than just ending with a conclusion section that summarizes everything they've read from the beginning. And I have just a few more points that came through while I was doing my mini investigation. Something else I noticed, the titles and the abstracts. The abstracts pretty much looked the same. The titles tended to be catchier in the articles written in Applied Linguistics or TESOL Quarterly. And I think this is something that's really hard, but it's something that I definitely need to think about myself. It's not just a second language thing. It's about
general creativity, maybe.
Exactly. We need to be more creative, I think, in our titles. And to do that, there are cultural references, but by cultural, I don't just mean American cultural. I mean within the discipline culture. If you know the past research really well, there might have been a title 10 years ago. And if you're building on that strand of research, finding a way of trying to incorporate that title in a new way to show your connection, this is a hard thing to do, but I would say that don't just blow it off and use a title that describes very straightforwardly what you've done. Because again, to go back to the desk reject thing, if your title and abstract don't catch the attention of the editor and don't show the editor that you're speaking their language, if the abstract doesn't show those clear steps, you might get rejected no matter how good your ultimate ideas are. So that was just something to keep in mind. The other thing, remember this whole study, and I'm using this because it wasn't really a study, it was me looking at some articles and counting paragraphs, but it was based on paragraph length. Some of the variation might have come from the fact that in the Western journals, the paragraph length varied very little. You know, some were a little shorter, some a little longer, but all kind of like that, okay? In the Turkish journals, there were paragraphs that were 1 sentence long, and there were paragraphs that were a full page long. And I have a little bit of a problem with that. I used to say this to my students. If you have a 1 sentence paragraph, there's a problem for me. I don't know. If the idea is important enough that it warrants a paragraph devoted to it, then it should be developed into a paragraph. If there's nothing there to say, if you can't develop it, then it doesn't deserve to be a paragraph. So I have a problem with 1 sentence paragraphs, but I have an equal problem with 1 page paragraphs. I think you're either going into way too much detail on this, whatever the idea is, or more likely you have 2 ideas that you failed to pull apart so that the cohesion in your paragraph is not good. You're starting out with 1 idea and you're building into another idea, into another one, and you're putting it all in 1 paragraph. So this is a basic writing, just sort of a thing. If you start finding yourself with super short or super long paragraphs, be careful. So that might have affected the findings of this mini study. Finally, remember I said you could be rejected on 3 levels. 1, desk reject. 2, you get your rejection. You get it goes out to the reviewers, but then they send back a rejection. That's not a bad thing necessarily. Even if it's a rejection, those referee reports, some of them are like treasure. They're like gold to you. So whether it's a revise and resubmit, or even if it's a reject, read those rejection letters or revise and resubmit letters very, very carefully, because they're your insights into that lingua franca that we're all trying to work on, to improve. We're all trying to improve our methodological lingua franca. And those reviewers are the gatekeepers, and they're the ones, that's the language we need to know. So I remember with my husband, he would get a revise and resubmit maybe, but he would get a rejection letter and he'd be like, sure, I got a rejection. And he wouldn't even want to open it at first. So no. And over the years, he's come to, there are some really, really good referee letters out there, and they can guide you tremendously. So take those seriously. Finally, promise my last screen here. As a disciplinary community, all of us out there, I'm looking at many colleagues out there, and to those of you who are junior colleagues or to graduate students, I believe, and this is why I decided to give this talk the title that I did, I really think we need to give more emphasis to methodology. This is for all of us. This is about expanding not just our students' methodological awareness and skills, but our own as well. We all can expand our methodological or methods toolkits, but I think in our teaching as well, we should be putting more emphasis on methodology. And I think this is both, practical, but it's also probably one of the most practical routes for getting published in top venues when we are facing those 3 big, systematic, domestic, and linguistic natural barriers or imbalances. Methodology might be the way of trying to right those imbalances somewhat. And that is the end of my prepared speech. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, Julie Hocam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk and highly valuable insights into our practices in Turkey. Even though a small scale research you carried out, we had the gist. we had the benchmarks and we had the signposts. Out of this comparison between the two sets of publications, one from the core inner circle, highly influential core journals from Turkish ALT journals, as you said. And before I make my comments and contributions, I would like to leave the floor to our audience members, and they have every chance, every opportunity to ask questions, to make comments, if any. Yes, the audience members. Among the audience, we have graduate students, some undergrad students, and some are colleagues. It's a great, I think, opportunity for them at the beginning of their academic journey. You are giving them the hints. I mean, how to fish, right? Yeah. Something like this.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, they're very lucky. Yes, please, we are looking for some, expecting some questions, if any. Yes, please, the audience members.
Finally looking at the comments too, which I couldn't read.
They're all thanking for this activity. They're sending their best wishes and thanks for you. And I think it's a very troublesome journey. People are afraid, are frightened by these what to do's and what not to do's, right?
Not easy. I mean, we all suffer from it, but like I said, there's no silver bullet, but I think that if you haven't, the basics are, if you have something that's of genuine interest to you, focus on that, really try to know it, really try to just be honest with yourself. What do you want to know about it? Come up with research questions that you really want to know the answer to, and then try to locate. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of journals out there.
Yes.
And I don't mean, I'm not even talking about the bad journals or, there are hundreds and hundreds of really good journals in Turkey, outside of Turkey, in other countries. If you have a topic of interest, you can find a place to publish it. It just takes time, frankly. So the other thing that's sad, I think, is we're all, in a sense, in competition with each other, it seems like. And so there's not a lot of shared, there's not like some site where you go and you say, hey, I want to publish something on this. Does anyone have any good tips for journals? It's a little bit more competitive than it is cooperative. So, yes. But maybe one of the things that senior people, I'm going to lump us together, Jamal Hoja, I hope you don't mind, but more senior people, because we have fewer pressures to publish now, maybe that's our job, is to try to help our junior colleagues to, guide them towards where to publish. I'm not sure.
Now there is more competition than the past, because now we have a lot of graduate programs, national, internationally, and there are a lot of people graduating from these programs, and there are very few positions.
Yeah.
So now we have the bar raised, even more higher. Yeah. And we have certain standards like, index types, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a personal question about this lingua franca?
Sure.
Suppose that the lingua franca of the world were Turkish, and you were an English speaker, and all journals were published in Turkish, and the core country was Turkey. With your current Turkish, would you find yourself confident and competent now? And if you were obliged to publish something in Turkish after many years of Turkish experience, for personal connections and immersion with the Turkish society. For now, if I ask you, for example, a high impact factor Turkish medium journal, suppose other way around, how would you say about your personal experience from the other way around?
No, Ed, I'm ashamed to be doing this in front of 80 other people. For my docentlik, I had to have a publication in Turkish.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And you know what? This is shameful. Like I said, my spoken Turkish is fine. And I say that with a grain of salt. But when it comes to my written Turkish, I've never taken a single course in Turkish. So my grammar is, very much spoken. So what I had to do, frankly, is I wrote something in English and I had it translated. And I'm ashamed to say that. And I hope none of my docentic professors, who are on the committee are sitting here now going, what? But it's the truth. That's what I had to do. None of you, I think, are in as bad a position as I was, because you've all been educated much longer in Turkish. I never had any formal education in Turkish. But even if I were to take my sort of second best language, French, which I've studied since elementary school, I couldn't do it in French either. But the only thing I would rely on, and this is why I have to say my talk today, what I do know is I would study the language, the structural language of the journal, the Turkish journal I wanted to get into. I would pick one of those journals that I picked on Friday, for example. I would look at the past articles. Of course, those have English. But anyway, I would pick a Turkish one, okay. And I would look at the structure. I would familiarize myself with the aims and scopes of the journal, with the structure of it, and then I would probably write something in English and have someone help me translate it. I have to confess, that's not very helpful to the rest of you out there, but I think you can do better than me. But I think those initial steps of familiarizing myself with the Turkish journal, with the expectations, at least that part I would try to do myself.
Thank you so much for your reflection. Now we have some questions from the audience. Okay. Can we direct these questions, Professor Aydınlı, Julie Hocam? Okay, my question is that, Yakup Alıcı is asking, my question is that how we can boost our motivation while keeping writing. It's sometimes hard, though, a problem for us who are prospective professional writers. Some key, in a nutshell, suggestions for them not to get bored of writing. How can endure writing? I think is they look for some bullet, snapshot.
The magic bullet. Two things I would say. One is not a bullet at all. The other one is neither is a bullet. The first one is just a recognition of your question, which is that there was a famous writer. I wish I could remember who he was. It might have been Hemingway or somebody, I don't know. He said, writing is easy. You just stare at a blank page until the blood drips from your head like sweat or something. It was a very gruesome sort of description, obviously sarcastic, saying it's easy. Writing is always difficult. It's difficult for me, it's difficult for all of us. So first of all, it's never going to be easy. The advantage with academic writing, the person who said that was a novelist. For academic writing, at least we have the advantage that you can break it down into manageable steps. So you don't have to think like, oh my God, I have to write an 8,000 word research article. No, think of it in little chunks and little steps and address those little chunks separately. Secondly, I have a second one. I forgot what it was now. I think that was the second one. The first one was the depressing part. It's hard for everybody. But the optimistic part, I remember the second one now. So the optimistic side is one, break it down into little chunks and give yourself, small goals. I always remember, some of you may know personally or professionally, Friederike Stoller. She's a scholar out of the US, but she ran the MA TEPL program at Kent 15 years ago. At the time, or 20 years ago, when I was doing my PhD and teaching there at the same time. And she said to me, make yourself lists of things you need to do in time sections. Like, I need 20 minutes to do this, and I need half an hour to do that, and have lists according to time. So 20-minute activities, 20-minute, 30-minute ones, 1 hour ones. And your writing can be, in a sense, done in a similar way. If you need, half an hour to look up certain pieces of literature, or you need 20 minutes to sketch out some section of your piece, breaking it up into chunks, is my point, is a way of making it less overwhelming. And secondly, to go back to something I said in my talk, oh gosh, it's got to be coming from genuine interest. If the question is something that an advisor has told you, oh, you should study this, but you don't really like it, I don't want to go against your advisor, but that's just a recipe for problems. Remember I told you what my master's and PhD theses were on? It was something both personal to me, because I'm watching my husband. It was of interest to me. And frankly, it was quite easy to write those two, the thesis and the dissertation, because I had the genuine interest. Nobody believes me, but I wrote my master's thesis in 3 weeks. I mean, I had been thinking about it, reading. But when I went to the library that first day and sat down and started to type, 3 weeks later, I was done. And that's simply because I was fascinated with the topic. And it was a genuine curiosity. So if you're really bored, I'm not saying, oh, throw it away and find something else, but see if maybe you can tweak the topic to make it of more personal interest to you or professional interest, maybe. And then accept that it's going to be hard work, probably. So.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions, but it all depends on your timing. We would like to leave you the floor anytime. You can leave if you like, because you must have got tired. It's totally up to you.
We can do a few more questions. It's 1:15.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. I'd like to learn what criterion we determined for the discussed part of the different articles. Professor Aydınlı mentioned some frequencies and the like. How does she determine these? I think it's a very technical question. Can he or she, okay, Metin Kartal, can he email to you about the technical details of this small-scale research? Yes, Metin Kartal, forgive us. There's another question. Is it okay to start publishing on a small audience journals, or better to aim higher standards for the starters? For the starters, what would you suggest? A small scale, or let's say lower, let's say impact factor journals, or maybe local ones, then going up the ladder? Is a kind of strategic question here.
As a strategy, I think, okay, if you have a pretty, if you're pretty confident about your piece, whatever it is, that it at least will not get a desk reject, then the argument could be made to send it to a serious higher journal in the hopes that you will get those treasured good reviews back, probably with a rejection, but those reviews will guide you to making a much better piece. But that requires time. So if you're on a tight time schedule, if you have, say, if you're okay with waiting 5-6 months to get a response, and you're not pressured, you don't need that publication in the next, 2 months or something, then I would say, why not? Granted, you still have to do all that research. Don't send it off to, applied linguistics because it had that massive impact factor. If it's not going to fit there, still it has to have a fit, it has to have all those things. But if you have a little time, that can be worthwhile. But if you're pretty sure that this is not going, if you get the sense that this is more local, more small scale, then I would say go local first, smaller scale, because it's experience. And that's the other thing that does help you get better at this, is doing it more. So it's a kind of a non-answer to your question, but it's the starting point. If you think, I've got something pretty unique and interesting in hand, and I've got 6 months I can waste, send it off to a appropriate top journal and try to get back that great feedback to make it even better. Maybe even a revise and resubmit, who knows? If it's like a small scale, interesting, but not mind-blowing, groundbreaking research, but a good solid little study, go local and learn from the experience of the whole process so that the next time you're ready to go higher. So it's a kind of an either or answer.
This was a question by Yasemin Kutlu. Thank you very much on her behalf. And Arkan asks, the language used in the research, I have noticed that most research is rejected because of the language used. For example, by non-native speakers, good journals are more appreciative of the language formed by the intuition of the native speakers. I mean, again, the core language standards, even in journal publications, are expected of non-native speakers. I think this is true, that the language barrier Arkan talks about. Berke Oğuz Yılmaz, such differences between local and Western, as we called during the session, journals are impossible to avoid. As we discover the Lingua Franca methodology, what are the core signals that can lead us towards contexts that a broader audience can benefit, not just our local journals? I think you have partly answered this question. The benchmarks you have set over here. And we have, I think the quote is from Hemingway, from Yasin Bulat. He's giving us a hand. It's from Yasin Bulat. Okay. And these are some of the questions and remarks. I would like to thank you again for taking your time. It was very intriguing and very, inspirational talk. And we have learned a lot. And our undergrad and graduate, I think, students will do their best from now on in their, research, publication, endeavors. I think it's a good chance for them at the beginning of the journey, halfway down the road. Great opportunity to listen to you and to get your all sorts of advice, from the minute details to the maximal level of organization. Of course, coming from your inner motivation, your connection with the research and science. And we would like to hear your concluding remarks, if any.
I would just say, coming out of the position, writing out of the periphery, one thing that's kind of funny, the blind review process. I've had pieces that I've submitted, blind review, but it's clear that it's somebody writing out of Turkey because of the cases I've used. And I've had reviews come back that say, not a bad piece, could do with some, it's obviously a second language writer needs editing. And it's from me. You're fighting against not only really, genuine, possibly some language issues, but also the preconceptions of those readers, that if they see something that says, this study was conducted in Gazi University, they assume you're Turkish, and they prejudge you. They look for those linguistic, oddities or something. So that's why to go back, to my main argument here is that if you can grab them with your familiarity with methodological and methods-based lingua francas, have the structure right and have the language, at least of your methodological data collection and analysis tools familiar, at least you might grab some people in with that language, and then they'll look and see if you're, the rest of the language seems to fit their standards. But you're right, it's a horrible disadvantage, but we can try to overcome it. Other than that, my final message would be, if anyone has questions about any of this, you're free to, my email address is openly available on the OSPI website, or Jamal Hoca can share it. I'm more than welcome to take questions about any of this offline as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a great pleasure to have you here on our first occasion of academic writing seminars.
Hopefully next year in person.
Yeah. In our wonderful hall, Mimar Kemalettin Hall. It would be a great honor for us to host you there.
I would love to.
Okay, dear audience members, thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your attention. I hope you will benefit a lot from this talk and more. And have a wonderful semester. Have a great semester. This is the first day of the semester. You are busy, I know. In your tight schedule, you have chosen to be with us. Congratulations for staying up. Thank you so much.
Thank you again very much. And thanks to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.